Ladies and gentlemen, capital G here. I'm going to be discussing Orvar the All form. Before we jump into that though, I do want to talk about my latest distraction. Really good game, by the way. It doesn't matter if you're playing it on a regular PS4, a PS4 Pro, or the PS5. This basically came out of nowhere to be amazing. Obviously the game's been out for about 6-7 months now. So a lot of you may have already played this, but for anyone who hasn't, the game is fantastic, runs smooth as butter. Even when you make a mistake and you end up falling in battle, the reload time, it's just seconds, like 10 seconds, you're back in the action. That's a regular PS4 that we're running here, and you make a mistake, 10 seconds later you have another try. Which, when you compare it to The Witcher 3, I just wrapped up The Witcher 3 a couple of weeks ago, and it sometimes takes 2 minutes to reload the game if you fall. So, game developers, please take note. This game runs smooth as butter. It is polished as polished can get. So fast, so comfortable to play. If you're a game developer and you see this video and you see me talk about this, take notes. This game is a technical marvel in addition to being an amazing game. Speaking of amazing games, Magic the Gathering, Orvar, the All Form, Commander. A blue and 3 generic gives us a 3/3 with Changeling. It's every creature type. Not the first time we've had a 3/3 for 4 mana with every creature type. Mistform Ultimus, most famously played by MTG Mazda. Tribal Commander. But Orvar does call for something a little different. Unlike Mistform Ultimus, Orvar has some triggered abilities. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, if it targets one or more other permanents you control, create a token that's a copy of one of those permanents. Cool. So we're basically copying our stuff with instances or any instance or sorcery that we happen to have that targets our stuff. The second line of text here, or third line of text as it were, when a spell or ability an opponent controls causes you to discard this card, create a token that's a copy of target permanent. We do actually have ways of bringing this back to our hand if we need to, but obviously that last line is not a focus. We care about the Changeling, and we care about most particularly targeting our own permanents with instants and sorceries. So let's start by talking about our permanents, starting with artifacts. Arcane Signet is just a fast rock, gives us colored mana. Generally I don't run these, I don't want to run the Arcane Signet in a mono colored deck, but here this deck is looking to try and combo off a little faster. We do have some combos in this deck, of course. So the Arcane Signet is actually quite welcome for a change in monocolor. Coveted Jewel. This interesting little piece from one of the more recent Commander decks. I think it's from the Ikoria Commander set. Don't hold me to it. I've never actually seen this on the battlefield. But for 6 mana, when this enters the battlefield, draw 3 cards, and it taps to add 3 mana of any one color, so that's actually really sweet. We get to draw 3 cards, and we have mana that we can spend to use some or all of those cards right away. Whenever one or more creatures an opponent controls attack you and aren't blocked, that player draws 3 cards and gains control of the Coveted Jewel and untaps it. So we do have to be careful. If an opponent has a chance to swing out at us and take control of the Coveted Jewel, then we're going to have to work a little harder. But once we have it on the battlefield, if we're able to tap our mana and copy it straight away, we're going to Value Town. Gilded Lotus at 3 mana of any one color. Doesn't draw us the cards, but it does ramp us up with colored mana. Isochron Scepter. Now, if you know a lot of players that still run the Crozen Grip, maybe skip this card. But if most of the people in your play group find Crozen Grip 1 or 2 mana too expensive for the effect of destroying an artifact or enchantment, then you should be good to go. For 2 mana, this artifact lets you take any instant or sorcery in your hand, 2 mana or less, and imprints it. Sweet. And then after that, anytime, you pay 2, you tap the Isochron Scepter, you cast a copy of the imprinted spell. Since it says specifically that you're casting the copy, it does trigger Orvar. Lotus Bloom getting the Time Spiral Remastered promo reprint in the old border. It looks gorgeous on that old border, by the way. It is amazing how all those newer, all those pieces of art that were designed for the newer frames looks amazing in the old frames. I was pleasantly surprised by that when I saw some of the early previews of Time Spiral Remastered. This lets us cast the card for 0 essentially, although we do have to wait 3 turns before we can actually have this on the battlefield, but once it's there, we're going to try to copy it a couple times and then take full advantage of all the extra mana that it gives us. Mindstone, again, a fairly fast rock. Taps for generic, or we can sack it off to draw a card if we need to. Prismatic Lens also taps for generic. It also gives us access to colored mana in the very rare event that we need it. The Sapphire Medallion reduces the cost of our blue spells by 1 generic. Soul Ring, we all know what Soul Ring does, of course. This is EDH after all. Swiftfoot Boots is here to grant our creatures hexproof and haste, or at least whatever creature it's equipping, not running the Lightning Greaves. We do want to copy it. We do want to target our own creatures, so we're not running Lightning Greaves because Shroud does not let us target our own creatures, whereas Hexproof does. Thought Vessel is here. Taps for generic mana. It says here we have no maximum hand size. If we're able to make copy after copy after copy of some of our card drawing effects, well, we're gonna need to be able to keep those cards. Lathron Dynamo is here. 4 mana, taps for 3 generic. We do have some more expensive spells that we're ramping into, so why not? One example of that is our first creature of the day, the Agent of Treachery. This M20 All-Star, double blue and 5 for a 2/3, but when it enters the battlefield, gain control of target permanent. And at the beginning of our end step, if we control 3 or more permanents that we don't own, draw 3 cards. Now imagine we get the Agent of Treachery out. We copy it a couple. Let's say we get 2 copies. All of a sudden, we have at least 3 permanents that our opponents own. And then all 3 agents trigger, and we draw 9. Yeah. Amphin Mutineer. This is a great piece of removal. For 4 mana, we get a 3/3 Salamander Pirate. And when this enters the battlefield, exile 1 target non-salamander creature. That creature's controller gets a 4/3 Salamander Warrior token. And it also has Encore, so if this is in our graveyard, we pay the Encore, exile it from our graveyard, and we get a token copy of the Amphin Mutineer for each of our opponents. And that's in addition to the fact that we can copy our Amphin Mutineer as many times as we want with the spells that we have. Artisan of Forms. Interesting little clone effect here. So for 2 mana we get a 1/1. It's a human wizard and has Heroic. Whenever you cast a spell that targets the Artisan of Forms, I may have the Artisan become a copy of target creature, and it retains the Heroic ability. I'm waiting to hear back. I've asked the question, but I haven't heard back yet if Orvar copies the Artisan of Forms, does it retain its printed stats, or does it become a copy of whatever it is at the time the ability resolves? Still waiting for an answer on that one. Check with your judges. But if it's the latter, where it actually comes in as a copy of whatever it is at the time that you resolve Orvar's ability, well, duh. It's pretty sweet. Always have this be the best creature on the board and be able to copy it as many times as you want. Sure thing. Brawl, Chief of Compliance, is here. Who saw that sweet reprint in Time Spiral Remastered? It's back as a time-shifted card, so it's got the old frame. Looks amazing in the old frame, by the way. It's not here to promote... It's not here in this deck to promote Time Spiral Remastered. Of course, it is here because it reduces the cost of our instant and sorceries by 1. And we are running a little bit of counter magic. So, if Brawl's out, we counter something, we get to draw a card and discard a card. Battlefield Thermaturge. A blue and a 1 for this 2/1. Also reduces the cost of our instants and sorceries by 1 generic. In this case, for each creature it targets, it gets that cost reduction. Sweet. It can also give itself hexproof if we target it. Now, we're not going to be targeting our own Thermaturge so often, but the fact that we can protect it in such a way is useful. Crashing Drawbridge, 0/4 for 2 mana with Defender. And it's a way to give all our creatures haste because, hey, if we manage to, I don't know, amass an army of tokens in 1 turn and we have our Crashing Drawbridge out ready to go, tap it, give the newly minted tokens haste, and swing out for the win. Cryptoplasm. This little 2/2, innocuous, but if you play it and it comes back to our upkeep, it becomes a copy of the best thing on the table while still retaining the ability to copy something on a future turn. And again, waiting here to see if when you copy this with Orvar's ability, if it's a copy of what it is at the time, or if it comes in as a copy as printed. It's a little tricky, a little rules tricky, but it's a sweet card nonetheless for this build. Rocking Deep Sea Kraken. It says 10 mana for a 6/6 that can't be blocked. We're not paying 10 mana, we're paying 3. Look at the suspend, a blue and 2 generic, suspend 9. So at the beginning of your upkeep, remove a suspend counter. Once the last one is removed, it's cast. We cast it without paying its mana cost, and it gains haste. But it also says here that whenever an opponent casts a spell, we get to remove a counter. So it's not going to take 9 turns to bring it out. It's going to take maybe 2 turns around the table. Diluvian Primordial. Do we have some opponents that are spell slinging? Sling them right back at them. 7 mana for this 5/5. Take an instant or sorcery from each of our opponent's graveyards. And we can cast them without paying its mana cost. Oh wait, if it targets our own creatures, that means we get to copy them with Orvar, right? Creatures, artifacts, enchantments, whatever permanent it may be. Draining Whelk. Now imagine a repeatable counterspell in the form of a creature, because that's what we have here. Now the initial investment, 6 mana. Yes, it has flash speed, but it's 6 mana to counter a spell. And it gets this 1/1 if we don't counter a spell with this, it's a 1/1 flyer. So obviously we're going to counter something with this. That way, whatever spell it counters, it gets a 1/1 counter on it for equal to the casting cost. So counter a 4-cost spell with this, comes in as a 5/5. Sweet. From then on out, whenever we target it with one of our instants or sorceries, we can counter another spell and have another Draining Whelk. So yeah, basically turning all of our copy effects into counter magic. Fibblefip is here. We can make copies of him to draw cards. Of course, the copies will disappear immediately because legend rule. Obviously, we're not casting it from our library or putting it into play from our library, so we're not going to get the 2-card thing going, but that's fine. 2 mana for a 1/1 that draws a card, and we can copy to draw more cards. Nice little fallback. Owl Familiar. Same theory behind it. In this case, it's draw and discard a card. That still lets us cycle through our deck, and at least with the Owl Familiar, copies of this that we make stay on the battlefield. Peregrine Drake. This is one of our game-winning pieces, obviously. When this enters the battlefield, untap up to 5 lands. So spoiler alert, we are playing instants and sorceries that have buyback that can target the Peregrine Drake. So what will happen is we target the Peregrine Drake with our buyback spell. Buyback, which means the card will come back to our hand instead of going to the graveyard. Make a copy of the Peregrine Drake, untap the lands, and we're actually going to be accumulating mana because all of those buyback spells that we're talking about cost less than 5. You'll see that shortly as we go down the card list. Both Shakashima of 1,000 Faces and Shakashima the Imposter are in this list. Specific purpose, copy the commander, Orvar. Because that way, every time we target one of our creatures, we get 2 or even 3 copies instead of just 1. Scourge of Fleets. We are running a lot of islands in this deck. So of course we're going to run the Scourge of Fleets. This 7 mana 6/6 enters the battlefield and returns all creatures our opponents control with toughness X or less. X is the number of islands we control. And yes, copy it, repeatedly keep our opponent's creatures off the board. Spark Double is here again to copy our commander or perhaps copy our planeswalkers. Spell Seeker. This one's a little expensive, but this is clutch. This 3 mana 1/1 lets us go get any instant or sorcery card in our library with converted mana cost 2 or less and puts it into our hand. This gets us a game-winning piece, so definitely worth the investment if you're going this route. Tempest Djinn. Triple blue 0/4. It flies, gains +1/+0 for each basic island we control. So just an aggressive flying beater. I do like to win by turning creatures sideways. This is one such creature that I would like to turn sideways, especially when I have 6 or 7 of them. Tribute Mage. Lets us go get an artifact with mana cost 2, puts it into our hand. It's here specifically to get the Isochron Scepter, although it can get some of our mana rocks as well. And the Voracious Great Shark. 5/4 with flash for 5 mana that counters artifact or creature spells. So yes, another way to kind of keep creatures and artifacts off of our opponent's boards by A, casting the Great Shark, and B, casting spells that target the Great Shark in order to have the token copies repeat that countering effect. A couple of enchantments, both sagas in fact. The Mirari Conjecture and Cure Best the Sea God. All 3 chapters are quite powerful. In the case of Cure Best the Sea God, Chapter 1 gets us an 8/8 Kraken with Hexproof. Chapter 2 lets us choose an opponent and tap all of their non-land permanents. They don't untap during the controller's next untap step. Chapter 3 is gain control of target permanent an opponent controls and untap it. We may not get to Chapter 3. Just saying, because you'll see why. The Mirari Conjecture, a blue and 4 generic. Chapter 1 lets us get an instant back from our graveyard to our hand. Chapter 2 lets us get a sorcery card back. And Chapter 3 lets us make copies of any instant or sorcery spell we cast. So cast it, get an additional copy for that turn. Now, ideally neither one of these are going to make it to the last chapter, and here is why. Clockspining. This little comment from the original Time Spiral, and thus far it has not been announced that it's been, as of when I record this, it has not been spoiled in Time Spiral Remastered. May not even be there. Because when you're condensing 3 sets down to 1, a lot of excellent cards are going to fall through the cracks, and this could be one of those cards. Clockspining, for 1 blue, it's an instant. It has buyback of 3, so for 4 mana, we get to cast it, target something, and get the card back into our hand. Choose a counter on target permanent or suspended card. Remove that counter from that permanent, or add one of those counters to it. So we can actually take lore counters off of our sagas, but most importantly, this can target any permanent or suspended card, and it doesn't have to have a counter on it when we target it. Choosing a counter on the permanent to choosing a counter that exists on the permanent is an effect, not a cost or a rule for targeting. So if the permanent in question, such as Peregrine Drake, happens not to have a counter on it, the card does nothing except come back to our hand. And so there's the idea. Cast a card such as a buyback card such as Clockspining on the Peregrine Drake. It costs less than 5 mana, so the token comes in, untaps 5 lands, the card comes back to our hand. Accumulate at least 1 mana every time that we repeat this cycle, generating infinite mana and winning the game from there. We have to defend our board, of course, so Counterspell helps us do that. Displaced, it says exile up to 2 target creatures you control, then return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control. Notes that Orvar can only copy 1 of the 2 targets. But nonetheless, if a board wipe is coming, or someone's like destroy this creature, or someone tries to knock out Orvar, Displaced does protect us from, say, targeted removal. Giga Drowse. For 1 blue, tap target permanent, and we can replicate it by spending as much blue as we would like. Every time we spend a blue, it does copy the spell, but it doesn't cast the copies. We still get to use the copies, of course, but we don't get infinite. We don't get, say, let's say we have 8 blue mana when we cast Giga Drowse, we cast it 8, and we replicate it 7 times. Those replicated copies will not trigger Orvar, so keep that in mind. But we get to copy 1 thing while perhaps disabling our opponent's board for a turn. High Tide lets us cast it for 1 blue. All our remaining islands now tap for an additional blue. Always been a big mana card for mono blues, so we're going to take advantage of it here. Illusionist Stratagem. A blue and 3 generic for this instant. Much like Displaced, exiles 2 creatures we control. Those cards will come back onto the battlefield under their owner's control. This one does let us draw a card, so the extra mana gives us an extra card. Everything I said about Displaced holds true with Illusionist Stratagem. Keep safe, somebody wants to target our stuff. Pay a blue and 1. Counters the spell that targets a permanent we control and draws us a card. Lazateplating. Steals games. Nobody ever sees this card coming. A blue and a generic. For starters, it amasses 1, gives us a 0/0 zombie army token with a 1/1 counter on it. Also note that Orvar is a zombie army. So if Orvar is out when we cast Lazateplating, Orvar gets the +1/+1 counter. Just thought I'd toss that out there. But that's not what's important about this card. What's important about this card is that you and your permanents gain hexproof until the end of turn. Nobody ever sees this coming. And I have seen it steal games. Time and time again. Mind Games is another buyback spell that we can use to go off. In the case of Mind Games, 1 blue lets us tap an artifact, creature, or land. And then the buyback of blue and 2 generic. Still the same thing. It's 4 mana to cast it and buy it back, and that's assuming we don't have any of our other permanents that reduces the cost. Muddle the Mixture, double blue, counters an instant or sorcery spell. We can also transmute this to go get a card that costs 2 mana. So at sorcery speed, you can go blue, blue, 1, go get a 2-cost card, put it in our hand. Appeal from Reality. Target a creature we control and target a creature an opponent controls. Return them to their hands. We can, in concept, return Orvar to our hand and then discard Orvar to copy a permanent. That is a thing that can happen. But ideally, we are going to copy something better. Make a token copy of something better while having the original back in our hand. And taking a permanent off of the opponent's board. Even if it's only temporary. Rescue. Return a permanent you control to its owner's hand. Same deal. Target one of our things, get a token copy of it, bring back the original. Or we can bring Orvar back to our hand. And if somebody has a discard effect, hey, discard Orvar. Why not? We can. Run away together. In this case, 2 creatures controlled by different players, so it could be one of yours and one of your opponents, or it can be 2 different opponents. Either way, I thought this was a pretty cool instant to toss in as well. Swan Song counts as an enchantment, instant, or sorcery spell. Yes, they get a 2/2 bird. No, we don't care. Teferi's Time Twist. This one is a slow blink, as I like to call it. Exile target permanent you control. Comes back onto the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. If it enters the battlefield as a creature, it enters with an additional +1/+1 counter. Now, when I say slow blink, I mean that someone casts, say, Wrath of God. You can respond with Teferi's Time Twist. The creature is gone until the end of the turn, which means it dodges the board wipe entirely. Good old-fashioned twiddle. Tap or untap target artifact, creature, or land. So the utility of tapping or untapping. For one mana, targets up to 3 different types of things. We can actually copy our own lands, which is a really cool effect, by the way. If we have Orvar out, we can actually copy our lands and ramp in blue. That's one thing we've not really talked about yet, is the fact that we can actually copy our own lands and ramp in mono blue that way. But the option is there. Whim of Volrath. For 1 blue, and has a buyback of 2, so it's actually cheaper than some of our other buyback spells thus far. Change the text of target permanent by replacing all instances of 1 color word or basic land type with another until the end of turn. Very old school effect, really messing with other people's colors. You could, for example, on somebody's upkeep, target an Urborg and say, instead of everything being a swamp, everything is an island. You could do that, and it's funny and very disruptive. It's a very old school effect, and it's still and again, all because a permanent doesn't have a basic land type or a color word doesn't mean you can't target it. So this can still target Peregrine Drake, for example, in combo off. This can still target Coveted Jewel in combo off. 37 lands, including the Castle Vantress, which enters the battlefield tapped unless we control an island. We have a lot of islands. This will come in untapped most times. Taps for blue, or we have the sort of fallback option of scrying 2. 31 islands, more than enough. 1 Mystic Sanctuary, which counts as an island. Path of Ancestry enters the battlefield tapped, of course, but it taps, add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity, so blue. And when that mana is spent to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type of your commander, scry 1. Guess what? Our commander is every creature type. So every creature spell that we cast gives us a scry on Path of Ancestry. Reliquary Tower, no maximum hand size. Swarm Yard. Here's a spicy ad. Taps for colorless, or we can tap it to regenerate an insect, rat, spider, or squirrel. There's only 1 creature in the deck that really meets that requirement, and that is, in fact, our commander. So unless a board wipe specifically gets around the regeneration clause, we can actually tap Swarm Yard to protect our commander. Tyrite Sanctum. Taps for colorless, or you can pay 2, tap it, target legendary creature becomes a god, put a 1/1 counter on it. Or 4, tap it, sacrifice the Sanctum, put an indestructible counter on target god. Turns out our commander is a god, because every creature type. So we can actually use the Tyrite Sanctum whenever as a fallback to give our commander indestructible. If ever we need it, we've got it. Our 2 Planeswalkers, Jace, Wielder of Mysteries. Triple blue and 1, and of course it has the clause that if you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. So it's kind of got the Laboratory Maniac thing going on. Didn't want to go like all in on the strategy, but we have enough card draw, especially with Coveted, especially if you end up infinitely copying Coveted Jewel, because that can happen. That Jace will bring us the win at that point. Also the +1 being able to draw 2 cards. Well, put the top 2 cards of someone's library into their graveyard and draw a card, or the -8, draw 7 cards. I mean, those are cool activations, but really it's there to win the game if we end up drawing infinitely. Tezzeret the Seeker is here as well, double blue and 3. The +1 says untap up to 2 target artifacts, so really ramps us up. The -X, search your library for an artifact card with converted mana cost X or less and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Another way to get our Icicon Scepter, or if we've managed to uptick it a few times, even get our coveted Jewel. The -5 artifacts control become artifact creatures with base power and toughness 5/5 until end of turn. If we end up copying our artifacts a bunch, that could actually prove relevant. Turns out we have to turn our artifacts into an army and start smacking our opponents. Could happen. Sorceries. Artful Dodge. Target creature is unblockable this turn, and it has flashback for 1 blue, so this will give us at least 2 copies, shall we say. We can copy something twice on a turn with this, or once on the first turn, once on a subsequent turn. Brawl's Expertise. Return up to 3 artifacts and or creatures to their owner's hands, and we may cast a spell of CMC 4 or less from our hand without paying its mana cost. So, cleans up some of our opponent's stuff, or we can have one of the targets be one of our own items so that we can create a copy of it while returning the original to our hand. And if that original just happens to be CMC 4 or less, we can actually recast it immediately. Just saying. Energy Tap. Not only do we get a chance to copy one of our permanents, in this case it has to be a creature. So it's 1 blue. Tap a creature you control, add an amount of colorless mana equal to that creature's casting cost to your mana pool. So it's basically a mono blue ritual effect. And yeah, not only does it give us a chance to copy a creature, but it gives us a chance to really make a bunch of mana. Gitaxian Probe. Ran it here just because it's a free card draw. Pay the 2 life, draw a card. Merchant Scroll. Another way for us to tutor for our game-winning instants and sorceries. Merchant Scroll is actually not super expensive. Maybe $1. So definitely pick this one up for this deck. Open into Wonder. X target creatures can't be blocked this turn. And until end of turn, those creatures gain whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Again, we can only copy one thing at a time with Orvar. However, if we do have a bunch of creatures, we can make them all unblockable and win that way. Quasi Duplicate creates a token and that's a copy of a creature we control. So Quasi Duplicate makes a copy, so does Orvar. So 3 mana, copy one of our creatures twice. And we can recast it on a subsequent turn by discarding a card and paying the mana cost again. Slip Through Space, 1 mana sorcery. Target creature can't be blocked this turn, draws us a card. And with Orvar out, copies a creature. And there is my take. So this has a couple ways of winning. We can amass an army of tokens and turn sideways for the win, or we can combo off and win with Jace. Either way, both very, very effective strategies for this fun little mono blue build. At least fun for us. I don't know how our opponents are going to think of it. I'll have to play the deck and find out. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll see you all next time. Bye for now.